Listen, that sound, that low thunder rolling across the hills, that is not a storm. That is an army. Tens of thousands of warriors, moving as one body, their bare feet pounding the dry African earth so hard the ground itself seems to shake. The dust rises like smoke. The morning sun catches on the wet shine of red ochre. That's a reddish-brown clay paint, smeared across their muscled shoulders. Each man carries a tall shield made of cowhide and a short, deadly stabbing spear that gleams like a sliver of lightning. And at the very front of this living storm stands one man. He is tall, taller than almost everyone around him. His eyes miss nothing. When he lifts his hand, 40,000 warriors freeze. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a single foot moves. When he drops his hand, they charge. This man was once a small boy that nobody wanted, a child laughed at by his own father, a boy chased away from villages, beaten by other children, forced to flee into the wilderness with his heartbroken mother. He had nothing, no home, no power, no respect. And yet, by the time he died, he had built one of the most powerful kingdoms Africa had ever seen, and changed the history of an entire continent. His name was Shaka, and tonight, around this fire, I am going to tell you his whole story, every triumph, every heartbreak, every battle, and the dark, haunting secret of how it all ended. But be warned, my young friend, this is not a fairy tale. There is no simple happily ever after. This is the true story of a real human being, a genius and a tyrant, a hero and a tragedy, all wrapped into one. So sit close, lean in, because before our story is over, everything you think you know about heroes is going to change. Let's begin. Before there was an army, before there was a king, there was just a land, a wild, golden, breathtaking land. Close your eyes for a moment and travel with me. We are going to fly far, far across the world, to the southeastern corner of Africa, to a place that today we call South Africa. The year is around 1787. That's more than 230 years ago, long before cars, before phones, before electricity. George Washington had just become important on the other side of the world, but here in Africa, none of that mattered. Here, the land rolls on forever in great green and gold waves. There are tall grassy hills that people call the rolling hills of 1,000 kingdoms. There are deep river valleys where crocodiles wait silently in muddy water. There are mountains in the distance, blue and hazy, and a warm ocean to the east where the waves crash on empty beaches. The air smells of wild grass, of wood smoke, and, most of all, of cattle. Cattle. You have to understand how much these people love their cattle. To us today, a cow is just a cow. But to the people of this land, cattle were everything. Cattle were money. Cattle were food. Cattle were a sign of how important your family was. A man with many cattle was a rich and respected man. Boys spent their whole childhood looking after the herds. The smell of the cattle kraal at dawn, that's the round fenced pen where the cattle slept, was the smell of home. The people who lived here were called the Nguni people. The Nguni were not one single group. They were hundreds of small clans. A clan is like a big extended family, all related, all living together under one chief. Some clans had only a few hundred people. Some had a few thousand. They spoke similar languages. They herded cattle. They grew crops like maize and sorghum, and they often quarreled with each other over land and cattle and pride. One of these clans, a small, not very important clan at this time, was called the Zulu. The word Zulu means the sky, or the heavens. But in those days, around 1787, almost nobody had heard of the Zulu. They were tiny. They had maybe 1,500 people. They were just one small fish in a very big pond. At the time Shaka was born, the Zulu clan was so small and unimportant that most of their neighbors barely knew they existed. Within 40 years, the name Zulu would be known and feared across the entire region, and is still famous around the whole world today. One small boy changed all of that. Now, this land was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. The clans were always competing. Two bigger, stronger kingdoms were rising in the area, and they would matter very much in our story. Remember these two names. The Mathethwa, a powerful kingdom led by a wise and ambitious chief named Dingiswayo, and the Ndwandwe, an equally powerful and ruthless kingdom led by a fierce chief named Zwaid. These two giants were like two great bulls slowly circling each other, and the smaller clans, like the Zulu, were caught right in the middle. This was the world. a world of warm grass and beloved cattle, of proud families and bitter rivalries, of beauty and danger living side by side. And into this world, into a small clan that nobody respected, a baby was about to be born. A baby born from a scandal, a baby that from his very first breath was already an outcast. His story begins right now. Before this child even took his first breath, the gossip had already started, and it would follow him for the rest of his life. Let me introduce you to two young people. The first is a young man named Senzanga Kona. He was the chief of that small Zulu clan, young, handsome, proud, and full of himself. As chief, he was supposed to behave properly and follow the strict rules of his people. The second is a young woman named Nandi, and remember her name, my friend, because Nandi is one of the most important people in this entire story. Nandi was strong-willed, fiery, and proud. She came from a different clan, the Elangeni. One day, Senzanga Kona and Nandi met. They fell for each other, and they broke the rules of their people. Rules that said a young man and woman were not supposed to be together before they were properly married. Soon, Nandi discovered she was going to have a baby. Now here is where the story gets cruel. When Nandi's family sent word to the Zulu clan that Nandi was pregnant, the Zulu elders did not believe it. Or rather, they did not want to believe it. A pregnancy outside of marriage was a huge scandal. It would embarrass the chief. So the Zulu elders sent back a mocking, insulting message. They said, "She is not pregnant. She is simply suffering from an ishaka." An ishaka was a kind of beetle, an intestinal beetle that people back then believed could cause a woman's stomach to swell up and stop her monthly cycle. In other words, the elders were sneering. She's not having a baby. She just has a stomach bug. Can you imagine? The most powerful people in your father's clan, joking that you aren't even a real baby, that you're just a beetle in someone's belly? But the joke fell apart, because a few months later, a very real, very healthy baby boy was born. And what did they name him? Did they apologize? Did they give him a grand, noble name worthy of a chief's son? No. To mock his mother, to remind everyone of the insult, they named the baby Shaka, after the beetle, after the lie. His very name was an insult he would carry every single day of his life. Yes, the most feared warrior king in southern African history was literally named after a stomach beetle. His name was meant to be a cruel joke. Shaka would spend his whole life turning that joke into the most respected name in the land. Things got worse. Senzanga Kona did not want Nandi as a proper wife. To the Zulu elders, she was an embarrassment, a constant reminder of the scandal. Eventually he was pressured into making her a junior wife, the lowest and least respected kind, but she was never truly welcomed. So little Shaka grew up in his father's village, but as the unwanted child, the boy who shouldn't exist, the living reminder of a shameful mistake. And children, as you may know from your own school, can be terribly cruel. The other boys in the village, including Shaka's own half-brothers, bullied him without mercy. They teased him about his birth, they teased him about his mother, and they teased him about his body. You see, when Shaka was young, the other boys claimed there was something they could mock about his appearance. They called him names. They laughed at him. They pointed. Have you ever been the new kid? The one who looks a little different, talks a little different, comes from somewhere else. Have you ever had a whole group of children laugh at you all at once, until your face burns hot and your eyes sting, and all you want to do is disappear? That was Shaka's childhood, every single day. And here is the saddest part. His own father did nothing to protect him. Senzanga Kona was ashamed of him. When Shaka looked up at his father, hoping for a kind word, a proud smile, a hand on the shoulder, he got coldness, distance, disappointment. Can you imagine being laughed at by your own father? But here is the thing about being pushed down again and again. It does something to a person. For some, it breaks them. But for others, it lights a fire deep inside. A fire that whispers, one day I will show every single one of you. That fire was beginning to burn inside young Shaka. But it would have to wait, because the bullying was about to get so bad, so dangerous, that Shaka and his mother would be forced to do the unthinkable. They were about to be driven out completely, cast away, sent into the wild with nothing. And what happened next would either destroy them both, or forge a king. The day they were thrown out, Shaka was just a boy. and he had no idea he was beginning the journey that would save his life. The tension in the Zulu village finally exploded. Nandi was a fierce woman, and she would not bow her head and stay silent while her son was tormented. She argued, she fought back, she made enemies, and eventually Senzangakona had had enough of the embarrassment. So he cast them out. Nandi and little Shaka, maybe 6 years old, were sent away from the Zulu clan with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the small things they could carry. Picture it. A mother and her small son walking away from the only home he had ever known, across those endless rolling hills. No bodyguards, no herd of cattle, no comfortable hut waiting for them. Just the two of them, the wind and the long grass whispering around their legs. They went back to Nandi's people, the Ilangeni clan. You might think, finally they'll be safe with family. But no, the Ilangeni were not happy to see Nandi return in disgrace, with a fatherless, mocked little boy in tow. To them, Nandi and Shaka were a burden, 2 more mouths to feed, 2 more reminders of shame. So the bullying did not stop, it followed them. In the Ilangeni village, Shaka was once again the outsider, the boy who didn't belong. He was given the lowliest jobs, he was the last to eat, he was teased for being the unwanted son of a chief who didn't want him. One story says that when young Shaka was sent out to guard the dogs and the herds, he let a dog get killed by a wild animal, and was beaten and humiliated so badly for it that he never forgot the shame. Years later, the boy who couldn't protect a dog would command an army that nobody on the continent could stop. Close your eyes. It's dawn in the Ilangeni village. The air is cold and grey, the mist still clinging to the hills. You are Shaka. You are maybe 8 years old. Your stomach is empty and growling because you, the outsider, ate last and ate least. You can smell the cattle kraal nearby, that thick, warm, earthy smell of the herd. You're sent out to mind the cattle before the older boys even wake. Dew soaks your bare feet. The grass is sharp and cold between your toes. And then you hear them. The other boys, awake now, coming up the hill. You feel your stomach tighten, not from hunger this time, from fear. They're calling your name, but not kindly. They're laughing. One of them throws a clump of dirt that hits your shoulder. Then another. They circle you, mocking your mother, mocking your birth, mocking the very name you were given. You want to run. You want to fight. You want to cry. But you can't do any of it. Because you're alone, and they are many, and there is nobody in this whole wide world coming to help you. That one person was Nandi. Through all of it, the exile, the hunger, the cruelty, Nandi never stopped loving her son. She held him at night. She told him he was special. She told him that one day he would be greater than all of them. When the whole world said Shaka was worthless, his mother said he was a king. And a child will believe his mother before he believes the whole world. This bond, this fierce, unbreakable love between Nandi and Shaka became the most powerful force in his life. She was his shield when he had no shield. She was his home when he had no home. But their suffering still wasn't over. A terrible famine. That's when crops fail and there isn't enough food and people begin to starve, struck the land. With food so scarce, an extra woman and her unwanted boy were even less welcome. Nandi and Shaka were pushed out again, drifting from place to place, never settling, never safe. During his childhood, Shaka and Nandi were rejected and forced to move multiple times, from the Zulu, then troubles among the Ilangeni, and onward. Historians believe this constant rejection shaped Shaka into someone who trusted almost no one and feared abandonment for the rest of his life. The wounds of childhood don't always heal. Sometimes they harden into armor. And then, when Shaka was a teenager, everything shifted. Nandi found refuge for them among a new group, and this group lived under the protection of that great rising kingdom I told you about earlier, the Mthethwa. And the Mthethwa were ruled by a chief unlike any Shaka had ever met. A chief who would look at this angry, rejected, fiercely intelligent young man and see not a beetle, not an outcast, not a joke, but a weapon, a future, a king in the making. His name was Dingiswayo, and he was about to change Shaka's life forever. The moment Shaka picked up a real weapon, the bullied boy began to disappear forever, and something far more dangerous took his place. When Shaka reached the age where a young Nguni man became a warrior, around the time he turned 20, he was called up to serve in the army of the Mthethwa kingdom, under their powerful king Dingiswayo. Dingiswayo. Now you have to understand what Shaka had become by this age. Those years of pain hadn't broken him. They'd built him. He had grown into a giant of a man. Tall, broad, powerfully muscled, with a hard stare that made people uneasy. All that rejection had turned into something fierce. He had something to prove, and a bottomless well of anger and determination to prove it with. And on the battlefield he was magnificent. Shaka was fearless. While other warriors hung back, Shaka charged forward. While others were cautious, Shaka was bold. He fought with a fury the older soldiers had never seen. He didn't just want to win, he needed to win. Every battle was a chance to silence the voices that had laughed at him his whole life. Dingiswayo noticed. Of course he did. A king always notices his bravest warrior. But Shaka didn't just fight hard, he fought smart. And here is where the genius began to show. Because young Shaka looked at the way everyone around him fought wars, and he thought it was foolish. Let me explain how battles worked in those days. When two clans had a dispute, they would line up on opposite sides of a field. Then the warriors would throw long, thin spears, called assegais, at each other from a distance. These throwing spears were light, with long wooden handles. The warriors would fling them, dodge the enemy's spears, shout insults, and fling some more. It was almost like a dangerous game. Usually only a few people got hurt. After a while, one side would give up, and everyone went home. Wars were loud, but rarely deadly. Shaka thought this was ridiculous. Why, he wondered, would you throw away your only weapon? The moment you throw your spear, you have nothing left in your hand. And what does all this dancing and shouting actually accomplish? Nobody truly wins. Nobody truly loses. The same enemies just come back to fight you again next year. Shaka had a different idea. A frightening, revolutionary idea. He believed that if you were going to fight, you should fight to truly win. To end the threat completely, so the enemy could never rise against you again. And to do that, he believed warriors shouldn't throw their spears at all. They should get up close, close enough to look the enemy in the eyes. So Shaka invented a brand new weapon. He went to a master blacksmith and asked him to forge a completely different kind of spear. Not a long, thin, light throwing spear, but a short spear with a thick, strong handle and a broad, heavy, razor-sharp blade. A spear built not for throwing, but for stabbing. A weapon for getting in close and ending a fight fast. He called it the Ikloa. Fun fact, the name Ikloa is said to come from the horrible sucking sound the blade made when it was pulled back out of an enemy. Ikloa. The very name of the weapon was the sound of death. Shaka didn't name his weapon after something pretty. He named it after exactly what it did. But a new weapon was only the beginning. Shaka started developing ideas about everything. How soldiers should move, how they should train, how they should attack. His mind was on fire with new tactics. He was, quite simply, a military genius. Maybe one of the greatest the world has ever seen. And the wild thing is, he had no school, no books, no teachers. He learned everything from the hard university of survival. Dingiswayo gave him the chance to test these ideas. He promoted Shaka. He gave him command. He treated him almost like a son, the warm, proud relationship Shaka had never gotten from his own father. For the first time in his life, Shaka was respected, admired, feared, in a good way. He was somebody. But Shaka wanted more than respect in another man's army. He wanted his own. He wanted what had been stolen from him at birth. He wanted to walk back into that Zulu clan that had laughed at him and mocked his mother and thrown him out like garbage. And he wanted to walk in as their king. And then one day, news arrived from the Zulu lands. News that would change everything. Shaka's father, Senzangakona, the chief who had abandoned him, was dying. The throne of the Zulu was about to become empty. And Shaka had no intention of letting anyone else sit on it. Before Shaka could become a king, he had to do something no one believed was possible. Turn a handful of farmers into the deadliest army the land had ever seen. But wait, let's slow down, because before we get to thrones and crowns, you need to truly understand what Shaka built. Because this is why we still tell his story today. Shaka didn't just win battles. He completely reinvented how war itself was fought. He took everything the old way did, threw it away, and started over. Let me walk you through his revolution piece by piece. Number 1, the Ikwa, and a new way to fight. You already met the Ikloa, that short stabbing spear, but the weapon alone meant nothing without a new way to use it. Shaka trained his men to charge straight at the enemy, fast, close, fearless, and stab, not throw. The first time Shaka's warriors did this in a real battle, the enemy was stunned. They expected the usual game of throwing spears from a safe distance. Instead, a wall of warriors came sprinting at them with terrifying speed and crashed straight into them, stabbing. It was over almost before it began. Number 2, the shield as a weapon. The warriors carried big shields made of toughened cowhide. Everyone had shields, but Shaka taught his men to use the shield not just to block, but to attack. A warrior would hook the edge of his shield against the enemy's shield and yank it sideways, twisting the enemy's body and leaving his chest wide open. And in that split second, Shaka turned a simple cowhide shield into both a defensive tool and an offensive weapon. By hooking and pulling the enemy's shield aside, his warriors created an opening to strike in the same motion. It was so effective that this technique was copied and feared across the region for decades. Number 3, barefoot warriors. Now here's one that sounds strange to us. In those days, warriors often wore sandals made of tough cowhide to protect their feet. But Shaka noticed something. Sandals made you slower. They made the ground feel far away. So Shaka made a bold, almost unbelievable command. He ordered his warriors to throw away their sandals and fight barefoot. His men were horrified. Fight on this rocky, thorny, blazing hot ground with bare feet? It was unthinkable. So Shaka made them train. He scattered sharp thorns across the ground and ordered his warriors to stamp on them and dance on them again and again until the soles of their feet became as tough as leather. Anyone who hesitated, anyone who complained, was punished severely, sometimes with death. It was brutal, it was harsh, but the result? Shaka's warriors could run faster and farther than any army in the land, barefoot, gripping the earth, flying across the hills like the wind. Shaka's barefoot army could reportedly cover up to 80 kilometers, that's about 50 miles, in a single day, and then fight a battle at the end of it. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 2 full marathons back-to-back, on rough ground, with no shoes, and then a battle. Most enemy armies never even saw them coming. Number 4, and this is the masterpiece, the bullhorn formation. This was Shaka's greatest invention, a way of arranging an entire army so cleverly that it could surround and destroy a much larger enemy. And he based it on something every single one of his warriors understood deep in their bones, a charging bull. Remember how I told you these people loved their cattle? Shaka turned a bull into a battle plan. Picture a bull's head with its horns and its body. The army was split into 4 parts. The chest, the isifuba. This was the strongest, most experienced group of warriors placed in the center. They charged straight at the enemy, head on, and held them there, locked in fierce fighting. The chest pinned the enemy in place. The 2 horns, the izimpondo. These were the youngest, fastest warriors. While the chest held the enemy's attention in the middle, the 2 horns went sprinting wide, one to the left, one to the right, racing around the sides of the enemy. Quietly, quickly, curving inward like a bull's horns until they met behind the enemy. And now the enemy was completely surrounded, trapped, the chest in front of them, the horns wrapped all the way around the sides and the back. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And finally, the loins, the umuva. This was the reserve force, the backup warriors who sat behind the battle. And here's the genius part. They sat with their backs turned to the fight. Why? So they wouldn't get excited and rush in too early. They waited calmly until the commander needed them to plug a gap or finish the enemy off. Can you see it? The chest holds. The horns wrap around. The loins wait in reserve. It's not just an army. It's a living trap shaped like a bull that swallows the enemy whole. And to make it all work, Shaka commanded his army with hand signals and runners carrying messages, so the whole giant beast moved as one, silent, coordinated, deadly. No shouting, no chaos, just thousands of men acting like a single terrifying creature. The bullhorn formation was so brilliant that military leaders studied it for over 100 years afterward. In a famous battle in 1879, 50 years after Shaka died, a Zulu army used his bullhorn formation to defeat a modern British army that had rifles and cannons. Shaka's ideas were so good, They helped win battles long after he was gone. Number 5. The regiments, building loyalty. Shaka also organized his warriors into groups called amabutho, regiments. Men of similar age trained together, lived together, ate together, and fought together. They wore matching shields and headdresses so you could tell the regiments apart. They became like brothers. And because Shaka created these brotherhoods, the warriors became loyal not to their old clans, but to Shaka and to the Zulu nation. He was uniting people who used to be strangers into one mighty body. So picture all of it together now. A barefoot army that could run 50 miles in a day, armed with stabbing spears that ended fights instantly, trained to use their shields as weapons, arranged in an unstoppable bullhorn formation, organized into loyal regiments of brothers, moving in total silence until the moment they struck. This was no longer the old way of war, where nobody really got hurt and everyone went home. This was something the world had never seen. This was an army built to win, completely. And the man who built it was about to point it at the very people who had once thrown him away, because Senzanga Kona was dead now, and it was time for the beetle to come home as a king. The day Shaka walked back into the land that had cast him out, not a single person was laughing. When Shaka's father, Senzanga Kona, died around 1816, the Zulu throne did not automatically go to Shaka. In fact, another son, one of Shaka's half-brothers, a man named Sigujana, had taken control of the clan. Remember, Shaka was the rejected son. By the old rules, the throne wasn't his. But Shaka had two powerful things now that he never had as a boy. He had the backing of King Dingiswayo and the mighty Mthethwa kingdom behind him. And he had his own fierce will. With Dingiswayo's support, Shaka moved swiftly. His half-brother Sigujana was removed from power, some say killed in the struggle, and Shaka claimed the throne of the Zulu clan. And so it happened. The unwanted boy, the child named after a beetle, the outcast who had been chased away, beaten, starved, and laughed at, walked back into the Zulu lands as their king. Imagine you are standing in that Zulu village on the day Shaka returns. You are one of the people who used to mock him, or your parents did. The sun is high. Word has spread that the new king is coming. And then you see him on the hill. He's not the skinny picked-on boy you remember. He is a giant now, broad shoulders gleaming with red ochre, the short Ikluwa spear in his hand. Behind him, ranks of disciplined warriors stand in perfect, frightening silence. He walks down into the village slowly. His eyes sweep across the crowd, and they land on you, on the faces of the people who threw him out. You drop your gaze to the ground. Your heart is pounding, because the boy you laughed at now holds the power of life and death over you. Open your eyes. Now, here's a question for you. If you were Shaka, what would you do? After everything they did to you? After all those years of cruelty? Would you want revenge? Would you want to make them suffer the way you suffered? Shaka, history tells us, did not forget. There are stories that he sought out some of the people who had been cruelest to him and his mother during their years of exile and made them pay dearly. The boy who had been powerless now had all the power, and he used it. This is the first dark shadow in our story, my friend. Pain doesn't always make people kind. Sometimes, the more someone has been hurt, the more they hurt others. Shaka had been wounded so deeply for so long that the wounds never truly healed. But let's not rush past how small his new kingdom was. When Shaka became king of the Zulu in 1816, he ruled over a clan of only about 1,500 people. That's smaller than many of your schools combined. He had maybe a few hundred warriors. He was the king of almost nothing. But Shaka looked at his tiny clan, and he didn't see what it was. He saw what it could become. He took his small group of warriors, and he trained them in everything he'd invented. The Ikluwa, the bullhorn, the barefoot running, the regiments. He drilled them mercilessly. He turned that little band of fighters into something sharp and deadly and absolutely loyal to him. And then he started to grow. When Shaka conquered a neighboring clan, he didn't always destroy them. Often, he did something clever. He absorbed them. The defeated warriors were given a choice: join the Zulu army and become part of the nation, or die. Most chose to live. Their young men joined his regiments. Their cattle joined his herds. Their people became Zulu people. This is the secret of how a clan of 1,500 people became a nation of hundreds of thousands. Shaka didn't just defeat his enemies, he turned them into Zulus. Every clan he conquered made the Zulu nation bigger and stronger, like a snowball rolling downhill and growing as it goes. The very word Zulu stopped meaning one small clan and started meaning a whole mighty nation. But Shaka's rise had a powerful enemy watching, and trouble was coming. His protector and mentor, King Dingiswayo, the man who had believed in him, the closest thing he ever had to a real father, was about to be betrayed and killed by their great rival, the ruthless King Zwide of the Ndwandwe. And when Dingiswayo died, the whole region was thrown into chaos. The great Mthethwa kingdom that had protected Shaka was suddenly leaderless, which meant the mighty Ndwandwe were now coming for Shaka. Outnumbered, surrounded, and standing alone against the most powerful army in the land, this was the moment Shaka had been preparing for his entire life. With Dingiswayo gone, the fierce King Zwide of the Ndwandwe turned his hungry eyes toward this upstart new Zulu king. Zwide was powerful. His army was huge, far bigger than Shaka's. To Zwide, crushing the little Zulu clan should have been easy, just another small fish to swallow. But Zwide had no idea what he was about to wake up. The Ndwandwe army marched on the Zulu, and Shaka, clever, patient, ruthless Shaka, did not fight them the way they expected. He used the land itself as a weapon. He retreated, drawing the huge Ndwandwe army deeper into Zulu territory, farther and farther from their food supplies. He had his people hide or destroy the crops and drive away the cattle along the way, so the enemy found nothing to eat. The mighty Ndwandwe army grew hungry, tired, confused. They had marched far from home into empty land, and they were starving. And then Shaka struck. His disciplined, well-fed, perfectly trained warriors fell upon the exhausted Ndwandwe. The bullhorns wrapped around them. The Ikluas did their terrible work. Against all odds, against a much larger force, Shaka won. He didn't just defeat the Ndwandwe. Over a series of battles, he broke them completely. One famous tactic in this war was Shaka using a scorched earth strategy, destroying all the food and supplies in the path of the enemy so they would starve. It's a strategy that great generals have used throughout all of history, all around the world. Shaka figured it out on his own, in the hills of southern Africa, with no military school and no books to teach him. That is the mark of a true genius. The victory over the Ndwandwe changed everything. Shaka was no longer a small-time chief. He was now the most powerful ruler in the entire region. Clan after clan either joined him or fell before him. The Zulu nation exploded in size, from 1,500 people to tens of thousands, and eventually hundreds of thousands. Shaka built a great capital city for his kingdom. He called it Bulawayo, which means the place of the one who is killed, or the place of persecution, a dark name that hints at how he saw the world, and perhaps remembered his own painful past. From this capital, he ruled like an emperor. Imagine you are a visitor walking into Shaka's royal capital at the height of his power. It's enormous. A vast circle of hundreds upon hundreds of beehive-shaped grass huts, arranged in neat rings, with a huge open space in the center where the great cattle herds are kept. You smell it before you see it all. Wood smoke from cooking fires, the rich earthy scent of thousands of cattle, the sharp tang of the red ochre the warriors wear. You hear it, the rhythmic stamping of warriors drilling in formation, the deep voices rising together in war songs that make the hair on your arms stand up, the lowing of cattle, children laughing, women grinding grain. And then everyone goes quiet. The king is coming. Shaka strides into the great central space, towering over everyone, and the entire nation, tens of thousands of people, bows. The ground itself seems to hum with the power of one man's will. This is what the unwanted boy built, out of nothing, out of pain. Open your eyes. Shaka was now a true king of a true nation. He had done it. He had silenced every voice that ever laughed at him. He had more power, more cattle, more warriors, and more respect than that boy in the wilderness could ever have dreamed. And through all of it, one person had stood beside him, the one person who had loved him when no one else would, the one who held him in the cold nights of exile, and told him he would be great, his Motherdy. She had lived to see her impossible promise come true. Her unwanted son was now a mighty king, and Shaka loved her more than anyone or anything in the entire world, which is exactly why what happened next broke something inside him that could never be fixed. To understand the darkest chapter of Shaka's life, you first have to understand the one love that held his whole world together. Let's pause our story of battles and kingdoms and talk about a mother and her son, because everything that happens at the end of Shaka's life comes down to this single relationship. Think back to the beginning, when the whole world rejected Shaka, when his father was ashamed of him, when other children threw dirt and insults, when they were starving and homeless and unwanted. Who was always there? Nandi. Nandi was Shaka's whole world when he had nothing else. In the language of the Zulu, she became known by a special powerful title. People called her Nlorukazi, the great she-elephant. Now in Zulu culture, the elephant is the symbol of strength, wisdom, and greatness. To call Nandi the great she-elephant was to give her enormous respect and honor. The woman who had been an outcast, an embarrassment, a junior wife nobody wanted, was now the most honored mother in the land. Shaka made sure of it. He had risen from nothing, and he lifted his mother right up with him. After all those years of watching her suffer for his sake, he finally got to give her everything: respect, comfort, safety, honor. Can you imagine how good that must have felt, to finally be able to protect the person who had always protected you? Shaka never married and never had a recognized heir, a child to take the throne after him. Some historians believe his bond with his mother Nandi was so intense and so central to his life that no other relationship could ever match it. For Shaka, it was always Nandi first. Now, I won't pretend Shaka was a gentle man by this point. He wasn't. He was a hardened, demanding, sometimes frightening ruler who had seen and done terrible things in war. But with his mother, there was a tenderness, a soft place in an otherwise iron heart. She was the one thread connecting the mighty king back to the frightened little boy who just wanted to be loved. Have you ever had one person, a parent, a grandparent, a special someone, who makes you feel safe no matter what? Who believes in you when you don't believe in yourself? Who you know, deep down, will always be on your side? That was Nandi to Shaka, the one safe harbor in his whole storm-tossed life. And then, in the year 1827, Nandi fell ill. And she did not get better. We don't know exactly what sickness took her, but we know that as she grew weaker, Shaka, the most powerful man in the land, the man who commanded tens of thousands, the man who could conquer kingdoms, could do absolutely nothing to save her. All his power, all his warriors, all his cattle, and he could not stop the one thing he most needed to stop, died. Have you ever lost someone you loved? A grandparent, maybe? A pet you adored? Do you remember that feeling? Like the floor dropped out from under you? Like the whole world went strange and quiet and wrong? Now multiply that feeling by 1,000. Because for Shaka, Nandi wasn't just a loved one. She was his only one, the single person who had stood by him from his very first breath, the keeper of his whole heart. When Nandi died, something inside Shaka died with her. The grief that crashed down on him was beyond anything you can imagine. It was bottomless. It was wild. It was the grief of a man who had lost the only love he had ever truly known. And a king's grief is a very dangerous thing, because what Shaka did next, in the madness of his sorrow, would horrify an entire nation. When the great she-elephant died, the king lost more than his mother. He seemed to lose his very mind, and the whole nation would suffer for it. I have to tell you, my young friend, that this is the hardest part of the story. This is where our hero, the boy we rooted for, the genius we admired, does things that are very, very difficult to understand. I'm not going to hide it from you, but I am going to help you understand it, because even the darkest parts of history have lessons in them. When Nandi died in 1827, Shaka was consumed by a grief so enormous it tipped over into something like madness, and he decided that the entire nation must mourn his mother as deeply as he did. But he didn't just ask for mourning, he commanded it, with terrifying, impossible rules. Historians, drawing on accounts of the time, describe a period of forced mourning that was almost unimaginable in its harshness. Shaka declared that no crops were to be planted, that no milk, the most basic food of the people, was to be used. He ordered that anyone who did not show enough grief, who was not weeping, who did not seem sad enough, would be seen as a traitor to the king's sorrow. And in those terrible days, many people died because of these commands. It was a dark, frightening time across the land. The grief of one man had become a storm that swept over an entire nation. People wept not only for Nandi, but out of fear for their own lives. Now, I want to stop here and talk to you directly, the way I would if we were truly sitting together by this fire. Why am I telling you this dark part? Why not just tell you the exciting battles and skip the rest? Because the truth matters. Real history isn't a cartoon with simple good guys and bad guys. Real people are complicated. Shaka was a genius, and he did terrible things. He could love his mother more than life itself and cause terrible suffering. Both of these things are true at the same time. And here is something important to understand. Shaka was a deeply wounded person. Remember the little boy who was rejected, starved, and beaten? That pain never went away. He buried it under power and conquest, but it was always there. And when the one person who had healed those wounds, his mother, was suddenly gone, the wounds tore wide open again, and this time there was no one left to hold them shut. Think of it like a dam, my friend. For years Nandi had been the wall holding back a flood of old pain. All that rejection, all that rage, all that fear of being abandoned. She was the wall, and when the wall fell, the flood came roaring out, and it drowned everything in its path. That is not an excuse. Nothing excuses the suffering he caused, but it is an explanation. And understanding why people do terrible things is how we learn to stop those things from happening again. Shaka built his mother a great burial place, and he assigned warriors to guard it. He created a special regiment to honor her memory. For a full year, he demanded the nation grieve. The land that had once thundered with the feet of victorious armies now echoed only with weeping. And slowly, the worst of the madness began to pass. The forced mourning eased. The fields were allowed to be planted again. Life somehow crept back. But the Shaka who came out the other side of that grief was not the same man who had gone in. He was harder, colder, more suspicious. He had always trusted few people. Now he trusted almost no one at all. And all across his kingdom, in the quiet places where people whispered when the king could not hear, a dangerous thought was beginning to spread. Perhaps the great king has gone too far. Perhaps the storm that built the nation is now a storm that could destroy it. Powerful men were beginning to wonder if it was time for Shaka to be stopped. And while those dark thoughts grew like weeds in the shadows, something completely new was about to arrive on the Zulu shore. Something Shaka had never seen before in his entire life. Strangers, pale-skinned strangers, stepping off the sea. And the world was about to get a great deal bigger. One morning, men with skin the color of bone walked out of the ocean, and not even the mighty Shaka knew what to make of them. Let's rewind just a little to the year 1824, while Shaka was still at the height of his power. Far away on the warm eastern coast, at a beautiful bay that today is the city of Durban, but back then was called Port Natal, a small ship dropped anchor, and out of it came a tiny group of European traders. Englishmen. Now, you have to understand how strange this was for everyone involved. The Zulu had heard rumors of pale people from across the great water, but most had never seen one. And these Englishmen had certainly never seen anything like the Zulu kingdom, a mighty African nation with tens of thousands of disciplined warriors, ruled by a king as powerful as any emperor. Two of these traders matter to our story. One was a man named Francis Farewell, a former Navy officer hoping to make his fortune trading ivory. That's the valuable tusks of elephants. The other was a young man named Henry Francis Finn, rhymes with win. And young Finn turned out to be very important because he wrote things down. Much of what we know about Shaka as a living, breathing person comes from the diaries Finn kept. A huge amount of what historians know about Shaka's daily life, his appearance, and his court comes from the written accounts of these few European traders, especially Henry Finn. There were no cameras and no Zulu books from that time, so these eyewitness diaries became some of the most important records we have. It's a little strange to think that the memory of one of Africa's greatest kings was partly preserved by a handful of foreign traders who barely understood him. When these strangers were brought before Shaka, the king was fascinated. This was a man whose mind never stopped working, never stopped studying, never stopped asking, how does this work, and how can I use it? He examined their strange clothing, their strange ship, and most of all, their strange and terrible weapons. Guns. The Zulu fought with spears and shields. These pale strangers had sticks of metal and wood that could spit fire and thunder and kill from far away. Shaka had never seen anything like it. He watched a demonstration of a musket being fired, and he was deeply curious. But the traders noticed he was not as impressed as they expected. Why not? Because Shaka, ever the genius general, saw the weakness instantly. He saw how slow these guns were to reload. He pointed out that in the long moments it took a man to pour in the powder and the ball and ready his weapon for a second shot. A wave of his barefoot warriors would already be upon him, a kliwa in hand. Shaka was reportedly unimpressed by early muskets precisely because they took so long to reload. He reasoned that his fast-charging warriors could close the distance and overwhelm gunmen between shots. He was right, for a time. But years after his death, as guns became faster and deadlier, this same challenge would eventually become the great struggle of the Zulu nation against European armies. Now here is something that might surprise you. We often imagine these first meetings between Africans and Europeans as instantly hostile. But that is not what happened with Shaka. At first, the relationship was almost friendly, in Shaka's own complicated way. He was curious about these strangers. He gave them permission to settle at Port Natal. He gave them cattle and land. He was amused by them, studied them, used them. To Shaka, these few traders were not a threat. They were a curiosity, and possibly a useful tool, a source of strange goods, strange knowledge, and strange medicine. And that medicine mattered. There's a remarkable moment in the histories. During a great festival, an assassin hiding in the crowd managed to stab Shaka with a spear, wounding him. The king was hurt, badly, and it was Henry Finn who helped treat and dress the wound using European medicine, helping the king recover. Yes, an English trader once helped save the life of Shaka Zulu. History is stranger than any story we could invent. But here is the heavy truth that hangs over this chapter, the part that you, as a clever young person, deserve to know. Those few curious traders standing on the beach were the very first trickle of what would one day become a flood. In Shaka's lifetime, the Europeans were just a handful of men he could welcome or wave away as he pleased. But behind them, far over the horizon, were nations with thousands of soldiers, faster guns, and a hunger for land and power. Shaka would not live to see it, but the kingdom he built would, one day, face that flood head-on. Just over 50 years after Shaka's death, in 1879, the Zulu nation he created fought a massive war against the British Empire, one of the most powerful empires the world had ever known. Using Shaka's own bullhorn formation, the Zulu won a stunning victory at a battle called Isandlwana, shocking the entire world. The nation born from one rejected boy's vision was strong enough to make a global empire tremble. But that great clash was still far in the future, because Shaka's enemies were not, in the end, the strangers from the sea. No, the men who would bring down the mighty Shaka were not foreigners. They were not even rivals from another kingdom. They were family, his own blood, his own brothers. And they were already whispering in the shadows, sharpening more than just their spears. The greatest warrior in Africa was about to be defeated by the one weapon he could never see coming: betrayal. On the last morning of his life, the most powerful man in southern Africa did not know that the people standing closest to him were the ones about to end it. Let me introduce you to two more members of Shaka's family, two half-brothers. Remember, Shaka's father Senzangakona had many wives and many children, so Shaka had a whole crowd of half-brothers. The same boys, or the brothers of the boys, who had once helped make his childhood so miserable. Two of them now step into the center of our story. Their names are Dingane, Dinganai, and Mlangana, Mushlangana. Say them carefully, because these are the names of the men who would change history with a single act. By the year 1828, Shaka had become a problem, even to his own family. After his mother's death, his rule had grown more frightening, more unpredictable. People around him lived in constant fear of the king's moods. Dingani and Mlangana, his half-brothers, were ambitious men. They wanted power for themselves, and they were also, quite simply, afraid that one day the king's suspicious eye might fall on them. Fear and ambition. When those two things mix together in the hearts of powerful men, terrible things follow. And then Shaka made a mistake, a fatal one. In 1828, Shaka sent his great army far away, marching off on a long military campaign to the north. His warriors, the very men whose loyalty and spears had always protected him, were now hundreds of kilometers away, exhausted, far from home, which meant that for one rare, dangerous moment, the king was nearly alone. One reason Shaka was so exposed at the end was that he kept his huge army almost constantly at war or on the march. The same restless, relentless military machine that made him unstoppable also meant his protectors were frequently far away, and his enemies at home knew it. His greatest strength became, in the very end, his fatal weakness. Dingaan and Mlangana saw their chance. Together with a trusted servant of Shaka's, a man named Mbofa, Mbopa, who managed the king's household, the two brothers hatched a plot. They would strike while the army was away. They would do the unthinkable. They would kill the king. Close your eyes one last time and come with me to a place called Quadakuza on a warm afternoon in September 1828. The great army is gone. The royal grounds are quiet, strangely quiet. Shaka sits receiving visitors, doing the ordinary business of a king. The air smells of dust and cattle and dry grass. Somewhere a bird calls. It is, in every way, an ordinary day. You are standing nearby. You see the king, tall, powerful, his eyes as sharp as ever, missing nothing. But today he misses the most important thing of all. He does not see his brothers moving closer. He does not notice that Mbofa, his own servant, has positioned himself just so. He does not feel the trap closing, the same kind of trap he invented, the horns curling silently around the unsuspecting prey. And then it happens, fast, sudden, the flash of a blade, a cry of shock and pain. The brothers strike together. Shaka, the genius, the conqueror, the storm that built a nation, is stabbed by his own family, on his own ground, with no army to save him. Open your eyes. Shaka, son of Senzanga Kona and Nandi, king of the Zulu, died on that day in September 1828. He was only about 40 years old. There is a legend about his final moments. The histories tell us that as he lay dying, betrayed by his brothers, Shaka spoke a kind of prophecy. He is said to have warned them that killing him would not give them the land, that one day the swallows would come. By swallows, the stories say, he meant white people from across the sea, who built houses of mud and lived in them like the little swallow birds. He warned that the white men would rule the land, not Dingaan. Whether he truly spoke those words, no one can say for certain, but history would prove them eerily, hauntingly true. And what of the brothers? What did Dingaan and Mlangana gain from their terrible deed? Not what they hoped. The two brothers had killed together, but a throne cannot be shared. Within a short time, Dingaan turned on Mlangana and had him killed too, removing his partner just as they had removed Shaka. Dingaan took the throne of the Zulu for himself, becoming the new king. So the man who murdered his brother to gain power was soon betrayed in turn. The blade in the shadows had a way of coming back around. Dingaan, who killed Shaka to take the throne, would himself rule for only about 12 years before being overthrown and dying in exile. And it was during Dingaan's reign that those swallows Shaka spoke of, European settlers, truly began arriving in great numbers, leading to fierce wars over the land. Shaka's dying warning, legend or not, came true within a single lifetime. And so the storm was over. The greatest king the Zulu had ever known was gone. Not in battle, not at the hands of a mighty enemy, but betrayed by his own blood. They buried him quietly, without the great honors a king of his power should have received. The man who had built a nation from nothing was laid to rest, and a chapter of history closed. But the nation he built did not die with him. And that, my young friend, is the most extraordinary part of all. He was gone. But listen closely, because the story of Shaka Zulu does not end with his death. In some ways, it had only just begun. Sit with me a moment longer by this fire. The flames are low now, the night is deep, and it's time for the hardest and most important part of any true story, figuring out what it all means. So let me ask you, after everything you've heard tonight, who was Shaka Zulu? Was he a hero? The unwanted boy who refused to be broken, who turned every cruel laugh, every thrown stone, every cold look from his father into fuel, and built something so magnificent that the whole world still knows his name 200 years later. The boy who lifted his suffering mother from shame to the highest honor in the land. Yes, he was that. But was he also something darker? A man whose pain curdled into cruelty, a ruler who caused terrible suffering, who let his grief become a weapon against his own people, who could love so deeply and yet wound so deeply at the very same time? Yes, he was that too. And here, my friend, is the lesson that I most want you to carry away from this fire tonight, the thing that matters more than any battle or date or spear. People are not just one thing. Real human beings are not cartoon heroes or cartoon villains. They are not simply good guys or bad guys. Shaka was a military genius and a wounded boy, a nation builder and a tyrant, a devoted son and a fearsome king, a person who was treated cruelly, and a person who in turn treated others cruelly. All of those things were true about one single human being, all at the same time. And the same complicated truth lives inside every person you will ever meet, even inside you. Today, the Zulu are one of the largest and proudest nations in South Africa, with millions and millions of people. The Zulu language is one of the most widely spoken in the country. The nation that began as a tiny clan of 1,500 people, the one the neighbors barely noticed, became a people whose name is known and respected all around the entire world. That is Shaka's true monument, not a statue, a people. Think about that. Shaka had no recognized child to carry on his name. He left behind no written laws, no books in his own hand, no grand palace of stone. By the measures we usually use, you might think he'd be forgotten. But he is not forgotten, not even close, because what he built was not made of stone. It was made of people, of identity, of pride, of a story passed from grandparent to grandchild around fires just like this one for 200 years. Now let's go back one final time to where we began, to a tiny baby born into a small clan that didn't want him, a baby they mocked before he even drew his first breath, a baby they named after a beetle, just to be cruel. If you had stood in that village on the day Shaka was born and said, "This child will build an empire. This child's name will be spoken with awe across the entire world for centuries," they would have laughed at you. Of course they would have. He was nothing. He was no one. He was the boy nobody wanted. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful truth in this whole story. Because how many times in your own life will someone tell you that you're not good enough, that you don't belong, that you're too different, too small, too strange, too much, or not enough? How many times will you be the new kid, the left-out kid, the laughed-at kid? Shaka's life whispers something across 200 years straight into your ears tonight. The way your story begins is not the way it has to end. But his life whispers a warning too, and we must be brave enough to hear both. Because Shaka shows us something else, something just as important. He shows us that even when we rise, even when we prove every doubter wrong, the wounds of the past don't simply vanish. If we don't face our pain, if we never let it heal, it can turn us into the very thing that once hurt us. The bullied boy can become the one who makes others afraid. The pain that built him was also the pain that, in the end, helped destroy him. Greatness and tragedy, my friend, were braided together in him like two threads in a single rope. So remember Shaka. Remember the boy nobody wanted, who became a king. Remember the genius who reinvented an entire way of war with no school and no books, only a brilliant, restless mind and a heart full of fire. Remember the son who loved his mother so fiercely that her death broke the world. Remember the conqueror who built a nation from nothing, and the wounded man who never quite escaped his own beginnings. Remember that he was all of these things, a hero, a tyrant, a genius, a tragedy, a human being. Listen, the fire's almost out now, but somewhere out there, across those same rolling green and golden hills of southern Africa, the hills of 1,000 kingdoms, the wind still moves through the long grass, and if you listen very closely with the ears of your imagination, you can almost hear it. A low thunder rolling across the hills. The drum of 10,000 bare feet on the dry earth. The sound of a storm that was once a boy nobody wanted. The sound of Shaka. Sleep well, young explorer, and never ever let anyone tell you who you are going to become. Because if a boy named after a beetle could shake the world, so can you.